I met Diane at a grief support group when I was 29 years old. My father had just died. She had lost her mother, or so she told me. We sat next to each other for 8 weeks, sharing the particular rawness of early grief, the kind that makes strangers feel like the only people in the world who understand you. By the end of those 8 weeks, she was my best friend. By the end of 20 years, I had no idea who she actually was. My name is Lena. What I'm about to tell you is the story of a woman I loved like a sister, and the systematic, extraordinary lie she built and maintained for 2 decades, right in front of my face. I want to start with what I knew about Diane, or what I thought I knew. She was from a small town in Vermont. Her parents were both gone. Mother from cancer, father from a heart attack 2 years later, which is why she'd come to the grief group. She had a degree in social work from a school in New England. She'd worked for a nonprofit for years before moving into private counseling. She was thoughtful, deeply empathetic, the kind of person who remembered the exact date of your father's birthday after you mentioned it once 3 years ago. She was calm in a crisis. She was generous with her time and her presence. She was, I genuinely believed, one of the most authentically good people I had ever known. She was also, as far as I can determine, entirely invented. The first crack appeared at my daughter's graduation party. Diane was there, of course. She had been at every milestone of my daughter's life. First birthday, elementary school plays, the terrible year of my divorce. She was godmother in everything but name. One of my cousins, who lives in Vermont, made conversation with Diane about the small town she'd grown up in. My cousin knew the area well. They chatted pleasantly for about 10 minutes before my cousin found me in the kitchen with an expression I couldn't quite read. She said, "Where did your friend say she was from again?" I said the name of the town. She said, "That's funny. She got a lot of details wrong. Streets that don't exist. A school that burned down before she would have attended it." I didn't want to make it awkward, but it was strange. I told myself my cousin was misremembering. That small-town geography was the kind of thing people get muddled after 30 years away. I filed it under odd and let it go. 3 months later, something happened that I could not file away. Diane mentioned in passing a conference she'd attended for licensed counselors. She referenced her license number in the context of a form she was filling out. I don't know why I did what I did next. Some combination of my cousin's comment still sitting uneasily in the back of my mind, and the particular tone Diane used, slightly too casual, slightly too quick, when she said the number. I looked her up in the state licensing database. There was no record of her license. I expanded the search. Other states. Her name, variations of her name. The name of the school she'd told me she graduated from. Nothing matched. I sat with that information for 4 days before I did anything with it. 4 days of replaying 20 years of friendship through a lens I didn't want to use, of looking for the seams, of finding them. The social work nonprofit she'd worked for, I looked it up. The organization existed. Her name did not appear in any of its records, its newsletters, its staff listings going back to the year she said she'd started. The school she'd told me she attended. I called the alumni office. They had no record of her graduation. They had no record of her enrollment. The town in Vermont? I found public records, property records, birth certificates, death records. No family with her last name, no parents matching the name she'd given me, no record of her existence there at all. I called a private investigator, not dramatically. I made the appointment from my car in a parking lot, speaking quietly, feeling like I was betraying someone I loved. It took him 6 weeks. What he found was this. Diane's real name was not Diane. Her actual first name was close, 1 letter off, which I later understood was intentional, a way to respond naturally to a name she almost recognized as her own. Her last name was entirely different. She was from the Midwest, not Vermont. Her parents were alive. She had a brother she'd never mentioned. She had attended a community college for 1 semester, not a 4-year institution. She had no degree. She had no license. She had been operating as an unlicensed counselor for over a decade. She had, as near as the investigator could determine, built an entirely fictional identity sometime in her mid-20s and simply begun living inside it. The grief group where we met. Her mother. The loss that made her seem so safe to me at the most vulnerable moment of my life. All of it fiction. I drove to her apartment. I had not told her I was coming. I sat outside for 45 minutes in the car, trying to understand what I was going to say, trying to understand what I was grieving. Because that's the thing no one prepares you for. When you discover that someone's entire self was a construction, you aren't just angry, you are bereaved. The person you loved doesn't exist. The friendship didn't happen the way you thought it did. The 20 years of trust and intimacy were built on a foundation that wasn't there. It's a very particular kind of grief. I had no language for it. I still don't fully. She answered the door and she knew immediately. I watched it happen on her face. The recognition, the resignation, the very brief flicker of something I think might have been relief. I asked her one question. I said, "What's your real name?" She told me. We sat in her living room for 3 hours. She didn't defend herself. She explained in a way that was coherent and also deeply strange how it had started. A moment of humiliation in her mid-20s, a job application rejected for lack of credentials, a sense that the person she actually was would never be enough. A small lie that became a larger lie that became a life. She said she had convinced herself over time that the person she'd become was real, that Diane was more truly herself than the name she'd been born with, that the empathy was genuine even if the credentials weren't, that the love was real even if the history was fiction. I believe some of that is true. I also know that several people trusted her with their grief, their trauma, their most private pain, believing she was qualified to hold it. And she wasn't. And that is not something I can set aside no matter how I try. I reported her to the state licensing board. I connected with 2 of her former clients who deserved to know. I have not spoken to her since. Sometimes I think about the grief group where we met. 2 women supposedly bound by shared loss. One of them telling the truth. One of them performing a grief she may or may not have actually felt, wearing a name that wasn't hers, beginning a friendship built on the most intimate possible lie. I think about my daughter, who grew up knowing Diane as a fixture in our lives, a constant, someone safe. I think about what it means to really know someone, whether it's possible, whether any of us are as transparent as we believe ourselves to be to the people who love us. I don't have answers. I'm not sure they exist. What I know is this: pay attention to the things that feel slightly wrong. Not to become suspicious of everyone you love. That's not the lesson. But because the truth, when it's there, tends to leave small traces, small inconsistencies, details that don't quite align. I ignored the first one. I'm glad I didn't ignore the second. Trust carefully, verify quietly, and remember that loving someone and knowing them are not always the same thing.